Hello. Welcome to Storytime with Moog. I am Moog, and today we are reading The Man Who Laughs by Victor Hugo, starting with part 2, book the 7th. Very exciting. Reading updates. I have 2 books waiting for me at the library. One of them is Wayward, and that was the winner. It won 2 awards on the Goodreads Choice Award for Best Books in 2023. It won it for historical fiction and for debut author, so I am reading it. It came super fast, like there was like no hold. I feel like a lot of the other books that won awards, I like am like hundreds on the list, but this one was like it's available, so I wasn't expecting it so fast. But that one's waiting for me, and then I also have The Eyes of the Dragon by Stephen King. It's an older King work, but our very own Wadsworth recommended that I start with that King book before reading Holly by Stephen King, because Holly is the book that won for horror in 2023. So I'm starting with that one as like an intro to Stephen King's work because I've never read him and it's just very intimidating. And I feel like a lot of King fans are very intense. So yeah, so I have those 2 books waiting for me. It's like the calm before the storm because I always feel like January, I am just very much like shot out of a cannon and I read like an insane amount in January and I feel like it's inching into December, which is okay, but also like I'm busy. Time. Okay. Let us remind ourselves of what happened last time. Previously on The Man Who Laughs. I was like, what is this book called? Okay, previously on The Man Who Laughs. This what happened last time? Okay, so Gwynplaine woke up in a room just full of velvet furniture, velvet ceiling, velvet wall, velvet floor. Everything's velvet and purple. And he's like, where am I? And Barkilphedro, who's just a creeper and constantly in the shadows, is like, you are in your own home, Fermain Clan Charlie, because now that's his like actual name. And Gwynplaine is just trying to process everything. He's like, okay, yes, that's right. I am royal. I am part of the aristocracy. I have all of this power, all of this influence, lots of property, like a whole bunch of things. And at first, it seems like he is like going down the like corruption trail. But then it seems like, oh, he wants to use his power for good. And he's like, everyone who is a royal is going to listen to me because I've lived the horrible, tragic life and I know the things that can be fixed to make life not so horrible and tragic. And he's like, I'm just going to bust in like Cusco a la, oh no. I could, anytime I try to say something and I get really excited, I just immediately forget. Emperor's New Groove. Like Cusco in Emperor's New Groove, he's just gonna kick in the door and be like, boom, baby, and then just like list all of the things that can happen. And he's like, they're gonna listen to me because obviously I'm for main clan Charlie now. And we all know that's not gonna happen. Like, we all know the rich are not gonna make life better for the poor. And so there is 1,000 like like money. There's like a ton of money sitting on the table and it's going to Ursus. Like that is how Gwynplaine wants the money to be spent. He's like, "Oh yeah, that's going to my dad Ursus." And Barkilphedro is like, "Well, I'll take this. I will do this." And Gwynplaine is like, "Yeah, okay. That sounds legit. Cool." So Barkilphedro goes to Tadcaster Inn and gives Ursus 10 10 little monies. He had over 1,000, and Barkilphedro was like, I can part with 10. Obviously, Ursus doesn't know this. And also the magistrate is there and telling Ursus that he has to leave. He's breaking the law. He has a wolf. him and his whole, like, everybody has to leave by tomorrow morning. Otherwise, they're gonna kill the wolf, which I hate that. And the, what's his name? What's his name? What's his name? The guy who is running the inn, he is super excited because he wants Ursus to leave, and he has wanted them to leave for a very long time. And so he's like, yeah, like, there's a boat that leaves at 1 a.m. I can help you along. And like, the circus people wanted to buy like all of these things from Ursus, so it'll be easy peasy lemon squeezy. And the magistrate is like, okay, cool, but we're not just here for him, we're here for you too. Like, you are also guilty. Like, you knew that wrongdoing was happening in your inn and you just let it happen. So you're going to jail. Bye. And I think that is where we left off. Let me double check. Master Nicholas, that's his name. Oh, and the little boy who works at the inn also, Govicom, they're also going to arrest him as well as being an accomplice. And that's where book 6 ends and also where the chapter ends, which leads us to book the 7th, and the book is called The Titaness, which is very exciting. And chapter 1 is called The Awakening. Wild. Wild. Let's do it. Chapter 1. The Awakening. And Dea. It seemed to Gwynplaine, as he watched the break of day at Corleone Lodge, while the things we had related were occurring at the Tadcaster Inn, that the call came from without, but it came from within. Who has not heard the deep clamors of the soul? Moreover, the morning was dawning. Aurora is a voice. Of what use is the sun if not to reawaken that dark sleeper, the conscience? Light and virtue are akin. Whether the god be called Christ or love, there is at times an hour when he is forgotten, even by the best. All of us, even the saints, require a voice to remind us, and the dawn speaks to us like a sublime monitor. Conscience calls out before duty, as the cock crows before the dawn of day. That chaos, the human heart, hears the Félix. Gwynplaine, we will continue thus to call him. Clancharlie is a lord. Gwynplaine is a man. Gwynplaine felt as if brought back to life. It was time that the artery was bound up. For a while, his virtue had spread its wings and flown away. And Dea, he said. Then he felt through his veins a generous transfusion. Something healthy and tumultuous rushed upon him. The violent eruption of good thoughts is like the return home of a man who has not his key, and who forces his own look honestly. It is an escalade, but an escalade of good. It is a burglary, but a burglary of evil. Dea, Dea, repeated he. He strove to assure himself of his heart's strength, and he put the question with a loud voice, "Where are you?" He almost wondered that no one answered him. Then again, gazing on the walls of the ceiling with wandering thoughts, through which reason returned. Where are you? Where am I? And in the chamber which was his cage, he began to walk again to and fro, like a wild beast in captivity. Where am I? At Windsor. And you? In Southwark. Alas, this is the first time that there has been distance between us. Who has dug this gulf? I here, thou there. Oh, it cannot be. It shall not be. What is this that they have done to me? He stopped. Who talked to me of the Queen? What do I know of such things? I changed. Why? Because I'm a lord. Do you know what has happened, Dea? You are a lady. What has come to pass is astounding. My business now is to get back into my right road. Who is it who led me astray? There is a man who spoke to me mysteriously. I remember the words which he addressed to me. My lord, when one door opens, another is shut. That which you have left behind is no longer yours. In other words, you are a coward. That man, the miserable wretch, said that to me before I was well awake. He took advantage of my first moment of astonishment. I was as it were a prey to him. Where is he, that I may insult him? He spoke to me with the evil smile of a demon. But see, I am myself again. That is well. They deceive themselves if they think that they can do what they like with Lord Clancharlie, a peer of England. Yes, with a peeress, who is Dea. Conditions. Shall I accept them? The queen. What is the queen to me? I never saw her. I am not a lord to be made a slave. I enter my position unfettered. Did they think they had unchained me for nothing? They have unmuzzled me. That is all. Dea, Ursus, we are together. That which you were, I was. That which I am, you are. Come, no, I will go to you directly. I have already waited too long. What can they think, not seeing me return? That money. When I think I sent them that money, it was myself that they wanted. I remember the man said that I could not leave this place. We shall see that. Come, a carriage, put to the horses. I am going to look for them. Where are the servants? I ought to have servants here, since I am a lord. I am master here. This is my house. I will twist off the bolts. I will break the locks. I will kick down the doors. I will run my sword through a body of anyone who bars my passage. I should like to see who shall stop me. I have a wife, and she is Dea. I have a father, who is Ursus. My house is a palace, and I give it to Ursus. My name is a diadem, and I give it to Dea. Quick, directly, Dea, I am coming. Yes, you may be sure that I shall soon stride across the intervening space. And, raising the first piece of tapestry, he came to. He rushed from the chamber impetuously. He found himself in a corridor. He went straight forward. A second corridor opened out before him. All the doors were open. He walked on at random, from chamber to chamber, from passage to passage, seeking an exit. End of chapter 1. Okay, so we get this internal monologue from Gwynplaine, who is basically like, who was that guy? He sort of ambushed me when I was still, like, waking up and in shock and couldn't quite comprehend anything. And he's like, and I just sent them money when obviously my family, Dea and Ursus, really want me to come back. And he's like, well, I'm going to go there. I'm going to go there because Ursus is my dad, and my dad definitely needs to be here in this palace. And Dea is my wife, and Dea definitely needs to be here with me. So I'm going to go there, and nobody can stop me. I need to get a carriage. With horses, and there have to be servants around. They're definitely going to hook up the horses to the carriage. And if anybody tries to stop me, they can't. I'm a lord. They can't stop me. I am leaving, even if Barkilphedro said that I'm not allowed to leave. I'm gonna leave. And so that's his internal monologue, and he starts out to leave. Chapter 2. The resemblance of a passage to a wood. In palaces after the Italian fashion, and Corleone Lodge was one, there were very few doors, but abundance of tapestry screens and curtained doorways. In every palace of that date there was a wonderful labyrinth of chambers and corridors, where luxury ran riot. Gilding, marble, carved wainscoting, Eastern silks, nooks and corners, some secret and dark as night, others light and pleasant as day. There were attics, richly and brightly furnished, burnished recesses shining with Dutch tiles, and Portuguese azulejos. The tops of the high windows were converted into small rooms and glass attics, forming pretty habitable lanterns. The thickness of the walls was such that there were rooms within them. Here and there were closets, nominally wardrobes. They were called the little rooms. It was within them that evil deeds were hatched. When a Duke of Guise had to be killed, the pretty Presidente of Silvicane abducted, or the cries of little girls brought thither by La Belle smothered, such places were convenient for the purpose. They were labyrinthian chambers, impracticable to a stranger, scenes of abductions, unknown depths, receptacles of mysterious disappearances. In those elegant caverns princes and lords stored their plunder. In such a place the Count de Chalouet hid Madame Corchamp, the wife of the clerk of the Privy Council, Monsieur de Montluth, the daughter of Haudry, the farmer of Lacroix, Saint Lenfroy, the Prince de Conti, the two beautiful baker women of L'Isle Adam, the Duke of Buckingham, poor Pennywell, etc. The deeds done there were such as were designated by the Roman law as committed vi clam et precario, by force, in secret, and for a short time. Once in, an occupant remained there till the master of the house decreed his or her release. They were gilded oblettes, savoring both of the cloister and the harem. Their staircases twisted, turned, ascended, and descended. A zigzag of rooms, one running into another, led back to the starting point. A gallery terminated in an oratory. A confessional was grafted onto an alcove, perhaps the architects of the little rooms, building for royalty and aristocracy, took as models and ramifications of coral beds and the openings in a sponge. The branches became a labyrinth. Pictures turning on false panels were exits and entrances. They were full of stage contrivances, and no wonder, considering the dramas that were played there. The floors of these hives reached from the cellars to the attics, quaint madrepore inlaying every palace from Versailles downward, like cells of pygmies in dwelling places of Titans. Passages, niches, alcoves, and secret recesses, all sorts of holes and corners, in which was stored away the meanness of the great. These winding and narrow passages recalled games, blindfolded eyes, hands feeling in the dark, suppressed laughter, blind man's buff, hide and seek, while at the same time they suggested memories of the Atreides, of the Plantagenets, of the Medicis, the brutal knights of Eltz, of Rizzio, of Monaldecchi, of naked swords pursuing the fugitive, flying from room to room. The ancients, too, had mysterious retreats of the same kind, in which luxury was adapted to enormities. The pattern has been preserved underground in some sepulchres of Egypt, notably in the tomb of King Psammetichus, discovered by Passalaqua. The ancient poets have recorded the horrors of these suspicious buildings, error circumflexus, locus implicitus, gyros. Gwynplaine was in the little rooms of Corleone Lodge. He was burning to be off, to get outside, to see Dea again. The maze of passages and alcoves, with secret and bewildering doors, checked and slowed his progress. He strove to run. He was obliged to wander. He thought that he had but one door to thrust open, while he had a skein of doors to unravel. To one room succeeded another, then a crossway, with rooms on every side. Not a living creature was to be seen. He listened. Not a sound. At times he thought that he must be returning towards his starting point, then that he saw someone approaching. It was no one. It was only the reflection of himself in a mirror, dressed as a nobleman. That he? Impossible. Then he recognized himself, but not all at once. He explored every passage that he came to. He examined the quaint arrangements of the rambling building, and their yet quainter fittings. Here, a cabinet, painted and carved in the sentimental but vicious style. There, an equivocal-looking chapel studded with enamels and mother of pearl, with miniatures on ivory wrought out in relief, like those on old-fashioned snuff-boxes. There, one of those pretty Florentine retreats, adapted to the hypochondriasis of women, and even then called Bordeaux's. Everywhere, on the ceilings, on the walls, and on the very floors, were representations, in velvet or in metal, of birds, of trees, of luxuriant vegetation, picked out in reliefs of lacework. Tables covered with jet carvings, representing warriors, queens, and tritons armed with the scaly terminations of a hydra. Cut crystals, combing prismatic effects with those of reflection. Mirrors repeated the light of precious stones, and sparkles glittered in the darkest corners. It was impossible to guess whether those many-sided, shining surfaces, where emerald green mingled with the golden hues of the rising sun, were floated a glimmer of ever-varying colors, like those of a pigeon's neck, were miniature mirrors, or enormous barrels. Everywhere was magnificence, at once refined and stupendous. If it was not the most diminutive of palaces, it was the most gigantic of jewel cases. A house for Mab, or a jewel for Geo. Gwynplaine sought an exit. He could not find one. Impossible to make out his way. There is nothing so confusing as wealth seen for the first time. Moreover, this was a labyrinth. At each step he was stopped by some significant object which appeared to slow his exit, and to be unwilling to let him pass. He was encompassed by a net of wonders. He felt himself bound and held back. What a horrible place, he thought. Restless, he wandered through the maze, asking himself what it all meant, whether he was in prison, chafing, thirsting for the fresh air. He repeated, Dea, Dea, as if that word was the thread of the labyrinth, and must be held unbroken to guide him out of it. Now and then he shouted, Anyone there? No one answered. The rooms never came to an end. All was deserted, silent, splendid, sinister. It realized the fables of enchanted castles. Hidden pipes of hot air maintained a summer temperature in the building. It was as if some magician had caught up the month of June and imprisoned it in a labyrinth. There were pleasant odors now and then, and he crossed currents of perfume as though passing by invisible flowers. It was warm. Carpets everywhere. One might have walked about there unclothed. Gwynplaine looked out of the windows. The view from each one was different. From one he beheld gardens, sparkling with the freshness of a spring morning. From another a plot decked with statues. From a third a patio in the Spanish style, a little square, flagged, moldy, and cold. At times he saw a river. It was the Thames. Sometimes a great tower. It was Windsor. It was still so early that there were no signs of life without. He stood still and listened. Oh, I will get out of this place, said he. I will return to Dea. They shall not keep me here by force. Woe to him who bars my exit. What is that great tower yonder? If there was a giant, a hellhound, a minotaur to keep the gate of this enchanted palace, I would annihilate him. If an army, I would exterminate it. Dea. Suddenly he heard a gentle noise, very faint. It was like dropping water. He was in a narrow passage, closed, some few paces further on, by a curtain. He advanced to the curtain, pushed it aside, entered. He leaped before he looked. End of chapter 2. Okay, so chapter 1 was Gwynplaine realizing that he needs to leave, and that he needs to go to Ursus and to Dea. And chapter 2 is him trying to find his way out. He's never been in this castle before or palace before or what have you before, and he's trying to get out, and it's just a labyrinth of rooms. And so we're just getting very elaborate descriptions of the decorations and the architecture and just the enormity of everything. And Gwynplaine's just trying to get out. And this whole time he's like, I need to get to Dea. I need to get to Dea. And that's sort of like what's pushing him, what's keeping him going. And every once in a while he's like, hello? Is someone there? And no answer. Just lost. What a great place to play hide and seek. All right. Chapter 3. Eve. An octagon room with a vaulted ceiling, without windows but lighted by a skylight. Walls, ceiling, and floors faced with peach-colored marble. A black marble canopy, like a pall, with twisted columns in a solid but pleasing Elizabethan style, overshadowing a vase-like bath in the same black marble. This was what he saw before him. In the center of the bath rose a slender jet of tepid and perfumed water, which, softly and slowly, was filling the tank. The bath was black to augment fairness into brilliancy. It was the water which he had heard. A waste pipe, placed at a certain height in the bath, prevented it from overflowing. Vapor was rising from the water, but not sufficient to cause it to hang in drops on the marble. The slender jet of water was like a supple wand of steel, bending at the slightest current of air. There's no furniture, except a chair bed with pillows, long enough for a woman to lie on at full length, and yet have room for a dog at her feet. The French, indeed, borrow their word canopy from can al pie. This sofa was of Spanish manufacture. In it, silver took the place of woodwork. The cushions and coverings were of rich white silk. On the other side of the bath, by the wall, was a lofty dressing table of solid silver, furnished with every requisite for the table, having in its center, and in imitation of a window, 8 small Venetian mirrors, set in a silver frame. In a panel on the wall was a square opening like a little window, which was closed by a door of solid silver. This door was fitted with hinges, like a shutter. On the shutter there glistened a chased and gilt royal crown. Over it and affixed to the wall was a bell, silver gilt, if not of pure gold. Opposite the entrance of the chamber in which Gwynplaine stood, as if transfixed, there was an opening in the marble wall, extending to the ceiling, and closed by a high and broad curtain of silver tissue. This curtain, of fairy-like tenuity, was transparent, and did not interrupt the view. Through the center of this web, where one might expect a spider, Gwynplaine saw a more formidable object, a woman. Her dress was a long chemise, so long that it floated over her feet, like the dresses of angels in holy pictures, but so fine that it seemed liquid. The silver tissue, transparent as glass and fastened only at the ceiling, could be lifted aside. It separated the marble chamber, which was a bathroom, from the adjoining apartment, which was a bedchamber. This tiny dormitory was as a grotto of mirrors. Venetian glasses, close together, mounted with gold moldings, reflected on every side the bed in the center of the room. On the bed, which, like the toilet table, was of silver, lay the woman. She was asleep. The crumpled clothes bore evidence of troubled sleep. The beauty of the folds was proof of the quality of the material. It was a period when a queen, thinking that she should be damned, pictured hell to herself as a bed with coarse sheets. And there's a footnote right there, and it says, this fashion of sleeping partly undressed came from Italy, and was derived from the Romans. There you go. A little history for you. A dressing gown of curious silk was thrown over the foot of the couch. It was apparently Chinese, for a great golden lizard was partly visible in between the folds. Beyond the couch, and probably masking a door, was a large mirror on which were painted peacocks and swans. Shadow seemed to lose its nature in this apartment, and glistened. The spaces between the mirrors and the gold work were lined with that sparkling material called adventitious thread of glass, that is, spun glass. At the head of the couch stood a reading desk, on a movable pivot with candles, and a book lying open, bearing this title in large red letters, Alcornus Mahomedes. Gwynplaine saw none of these details. He had eyes only for the woman. He was at once stupefied and filled with tumultuous emotions, states apparently incompatible, yet sometimes coexistent. He recognized her. Her eyes were closed, but her face was turned towards him. It was the Duchess. She, the mysterious being in whom all the splendors of the unknown were united. She who had occasioned him so many unavowable dreams. She who had written him so strange a letter. The only woman in the world of whom he could say, "She has seen me, and she desires me." He had dismissed the dreams from his mind. He had burnt the letter. He had, as far as lay in his power, banished the remembrance of her from his thoughts and dreams. He no longer thought of her. He had forgotten her. Again he saw her, and saw her terrible in power. His breath came in short catches. He felt as if he were in a storm-driven cloud. He looked. This woman before him. Was it possible? At the theatre a duchess, here a nereid, a nymph, a fairy. Always in apparition. He tried to fly, but felt the futility of the attempt. His eyes were riveted on the vision, as though he were bound. Was she a woman? Was she a maiden? Both. Messalina was perhaps present, though invisible, and smiled while Diana kept watch. Over all her beauty was the radiance of inaccessibility. No purity could compare with her chaste and haughty form. Certain snows, which have never been touched, give an idea of it, such as the sacred whiteness of the Jungfrau. Immodesty was merged in splendor. She felt the security of an Olympian, who knew that she was the daughter of the depths, and might say to the ocean, "Father!" And she exposed herself, unattainable and proud, to everything that should pass, to looks, to desires, to ravings, to dreams, as proud in her languor and on her Bordeaux couch as Venus in the immensity of the sea foam. She had slept all night, and was prolonging her sleep into the daylight. Her boldness, begun in shadow, continued in light. Gwynplaine shuddered. He admired her with an unhealthy and absorbing admiration which ended in fear. Misfortunes never come singly. Gwynplaine thought he had drained to the dregs the cup of his ill luck. Now it was refilled. Who was it who was hurling all those unremitting thunderbolts on his devoted head, and who had now thrown against him, as he stood trembling there, a sleeping goddess? What was the dangerous and desirable object of his dream lurking all the while behind these successive glimpses of heaven? Did these favors of the mysterious temper tend to inspire him with vague aspirations and confused ideas, and overwhelm him with an intoxicating series of realities proceeding from apparent impossibilities? Wherefore did all the shadows conspire against him, a wretched man? And what would become of him, with all those evil smiles of fortune beaming on him? Was his temptation prearranged? This woman, how and why was she there? No explanation. Why him? Why her? Was he made a peer of England expressly for this duchess? Who had brought them together? Who was the dupe? Who the victim? Whose simplicity was being abused? Was it God who was being deceived? All these undefined thoughts passed confusedly, like a flight of dark shadows through his brain. That magical and malevolent abode, that strange and prison-like palace, was it also in the plot? Gwynplaine suffered a partial unconsciousness. Suppressed emotions threatened to strangle him. He was weighed down by an overwhelming force. His will became powerless. How could he resist? He was incoherent and entranced. This time he felt he was becoming irremediably insane. His dark, headlong fall over the precipice of stupefaction continued. But the woman slept on. What aggravated the storm within him was that he saw not the princess, not the duchess, not the lady, but the woman. Gwynplaine, losing all self-command, trembled. What could he do against such a temptation? Here were no skillful effects of dress, no silken folds, no complex and coquettish adornments, no affected exaggeration of concealment or of exhibition, no cloud. It was fearful simplicity, a sort of mysterious summons, the shameless audacity of Eden. The whole of the dark side of human nature was there, Eve, worse than Satan. The human and the superhuman commingled, a perplexing ecstasy, winding up in a brutal triumph of instinct over duty. The sovereign contour of beauty is imperious. When it leaves the ideal and condescends to be real, its proximity is fatal to man. Now and then the Duchess moved softly on the bed, with the vague movement of a cloud in the heavens, changing as a vapor changes its form. Absurd as it may appear, though he saw her present in the flesh before him, yet she seemed a chimera, and, palpable as she was, she seemed to him afar off. Sacred and livid he gazed on. He listened for her breathing and fancied he heard only a phantom's respiration. He was attracted, though against his will. How arm himself against her, or against himself? He had been prepared for everything except this danger. A savage doorkeeper, a raging monster of a jailer, such were his expected antagonists. He looked for Siberius. He saw Hebe. A sleeping woman. What an opponent! He closed his eyes. Too bright a dawn blinds the eyes. But through his closed eyelids there penetrated at once the woman's form, not so distinct, but beautiful as ever. Fly! Easier said than done. He had already tried and failed. He was rooted to the ground as if in a dream. When we try to draw back, temptation clogs our feet and glues them to the earth. We can still advance, but to retire is impossible. The invisible arms of sin rise from below and drag us down. There is a commonplace idea, accepted by everyone, that feelings become blunted by experience. Nothing can be more untrue. You might as well say that by dropping nitric acid slowly on a sore, it would heal and become sound, and that torture dulled the sufferings of demons. The truth is that each fresh application intensifies the pain. From one surprise after another, Gwynplaine had become desperate. That cup, his reason, under his new stupor, was overflowing. He felt within him a terrible awakening. Compass he no longer possessed. One idea only was before him: the woman. An indescribable happiness appeared, which threatened to overwhelm him. He could no longer decide for himself. There was an irresistible current and a reef. The reef was not a rock, but a siren, a magnet at the bottom of the abyss. He wished to tear himself away from this magnet, but how was he to carry out his wish? He had ceased to feel any basis of support. Who can foresee the fluctuations of the human mind? A man may be wrecked, as is a ship. Conscience is an anchor. It is a terrible thing, but like the anchor, conscience may be carried away. He had not even the chance of being repulsed on account of his terrible disfigurement. The woman had written to say that she loved him. In every crisis, there is a moment when the scale hesitates before kicking the beam. When we lean on the worst side of our nature, instead of strengthening our better qualities, the moral force which has been preserving the balance gives way, and down we go. Had this critical moment in Gwynplaine's life arrived? How could he escape? So it is she, the Duchess, the woman. There she was in that lonely room, asleep, far from succor, helpless, alone, at his mercy. Yet he was in her power. The Duchess. We have, perchance, observed a star in the distant firmament. We have admired it. It is so far off. What can there be to make us shudder in a fixed star? Well, one night, rather, it moves. We perceive a trembling gleam around it. The star which we managed to be immovable is in motion. It is no longer a star, but a comet, the incendiary giant of the skies. The luminary moves on, grows bigger, shakes off a shower of sparks and fire, and becomes enormous. It advances towards us. Oh, horror! It is coming our way. The comet recognizes us, marks us for its own, and will not be turned aside. Irresistible attack of the heavens. What is it which is bearing down on us? An excess of light which blinds us, an excess of life which kills us. That proposal which the heavens make we refuse, that unfathomable love we reject. We close our eyes, we hide, we tear ourselves away, we imagine the danger is past. We open our eyes. The formidable star is still before us, but no longer a star. It has become a world unknown, a world of lava and ashes, the devastating prodigy of space. It fills the sky, allowing no compeers. The carbuncle of the firmament's depths, a diamond in the distance, when drawn close to us, becomes a furnace. You are caught in the flames, and the first sensation of burning is that of a heavenly warmth. End of chapter 3. All right, so this chapter, Gwynplaine is still rummaging around. Well, not rummaging. He's going from room to room, still trying to find a way out. And he goes into this room, and it's it's Lady Hosiana's room, and she's laying on a couch sleeping, and he's just overwhelmed by everything. By everything, because he remembers the letter. He remembers that she said that she loves him even after seeing his face and not being grossed out or scared or repulsed or anything like that. Like, she still loves him. And so he's like, I forgot all about her, but here she is, sleeping on this couch, and how am I supposed to leave? And it's like, just leave. But this whole chapter is him just being drawn to her and unable to leave. Which leads us to chapter 4, which is called Satan. So we had Eve, and now we have Satan. Yeah, Eve and now Satan. And in this past chapter, it was even mentioned that Eve is worse than Satan. So interesting that we get that little line in chapter 3, and now chapter 4 being titled Satan. It's just like, it's a cool juxtaposition. I like it. All right, chapter 4, Satan. Suddenly the sleeper awoke. She sat up with sudden and gracious dignity of movement, her fair silken tresses falling in soft disorder. Then, stretching herself, she yawned like a tigress in the rising sun. Perhaps Gwynplaine breathed heavily, as we do when we endeavor to restrain our respiration. "Is anyone there?" said she. She yawned as she spoke, and her very yawn was graceful. Gwynplaine listened to the unfamiliar voice, the voice of a charmer, its accents exquisitely haughty, its caressing intonation softening its native arrogance. Then, rising on her knees, there is an antique statue kneeling thus in the midst of 1,000 transparent folds. She drew the dressing gown toward her, and springing from the couch stood upright. In the twinkling of an eye, the silken robe was around her. The trailing sleeve concealed her hands. Only the tips of her toes, with little pink nails like those of an infant, were left visible. Having drawn from underneath the dressing gown a mass of hair which had been imprisoned by it, she crossed behind the couch to the end of the room, and placed an ear to the painted mirror, which was, apparently, a door. Tapping the glass with her finger, she called, "Is anyone there? Lord David? Are you come already? What time is it, then? Is that you, Barkilphedro?" She turned from the glass. No, it was not there. "Is there anyone in the bathroom? Will you answer?" Of course not. No one would come that way. Going to the silver lace curtain, she raised in her foot, thrust it aside with her shoulder, and entered the marble room. An agonized numbness fell upon Gwynplaine. No possibility of concealment. It was too late to fly. Moreover, he was no longer equal to the exertion. He wished that the earth might open and swallow him up, anything to hide him. She saw him. She stared, immensely astonished, but without the slightest nervousness. Then, in a tone of mingled pleasure and contempt, she said, "Why, it is Gwynplaine." Suddenly, with a rapid spring, for this cat was a panther, she flung herself on his neck. Suddenly pushing him back and holding him by both shoulders with her small claw-like hands, she stood up face to face with him and began to gaze at him with a strange expression. It was a fatal glance she gave him with her Aldebaran-like eyes, a glance at once equivocal and star-like. Gwynplaine watched the blue eye and the black eye, distracted by the double ray of heaven and of hell that shone in the orbs thus fixed on him. The man and the woman threw a malign, dazzling reflection one on the other. Both were fascinated, he by her beauty, she by his deformity. Both were in a measure awe-stricken, pressed down as by an overwhelming weight. He was speechless. "Oh," she cried out, "how clever you are! You are come. You found out that I was obliged to leave London. You followed me. That was right. Your being here proves you to be a wonder." The simultaneous return of self-possession acts like a flash of lightning. Gwynplaine, indistinctly warned by a vague, rude, but honest misgiving, drew back, but the pink nails clung to his shoulder and restrained him. Some inexorable power proclaimed its sway over him. He himself, a wild beast, was caged in a wild beast's den. She continued. "Anne, you fool, you know who I mean. The Queen ordered me to Windsor without giving any reason. When I arrived, she was closeted with her idiot of a chancellor. But how did you contrive to obtain access to me? That's what I call being a man. Obstacles, indeed, there are no such things. You come at a call. You found things out. My name, the Duchess Hosiana, you knew, I fancy. Who was it brought you in? Oh, no doubt it was the page. Oh, clever he is. I will give him 100 guineas. Which way did you get in? Tell me. No, don't tell me. I don't want to know. Explanations diminish the interest. I prefer the marvelous. And you are hideous enough to be wonderful. You have fallen from the highest heavens, or you have risen from the depths of hell through the devil's trapdoor. Nothing can be more natural. The ceiling opened, or the floor yawned, a descent in a cloud, or an ascent in a mass of fire and brimstone. That is how you have traveled. You have a right to enter like the gods. Agreed, you are my lover. Gwynplaine was scared and listened, his mind growing more irresolute every moment. Now all was certain. Impossible to have any further doubt. That letter, the woman confirmed its meaning. Gwynplaine, the lover, and the beloved of a duchess. Mighty pride, with its thousand baleful heads, stirred his wretched heart. Vanity, that powerful agent within us, works us measureless evil. The Duchess went on. Since you are here, it is so decreed. I ask nothing more. There is someone on high or in hell who brings us together. The betrothal of Styx and Aurora. Unbridled ceremonies, beyond all laws. The very day I first saw you, I said, "It is he. I recognize him. He is the monster of my dreams. He shall be mine. We should give destiny a helping hand. Therefore I wrote to you. One question, Gwynplaine. Do you believe in predestination? For my part, I have believed in it since I read in Cicero Scipio's dream. Oh, I did not observe it. Dressed like a gentleman, you in fine clothes. Why not? You are a mountebank. Not all the more reason. A juggler is as good as a lord. Moreover, what lords? Clowns. You have a noble figure. You are magnificently made. It is wonderful that you should be here. When did you arrive? How long have you been here? Did you see me naked? I am beautiful, am I not? I was going to take my bath. Oh, how I love you. You read my letter. Did you read it yourself? Did anyone read it to you? Can you read? Probably you are ignorant. I ask questions, but don't answer them. I don't like the sound of your voice. It is soft. An extraordinary thing like you should snarl and not speak. You sing harmoniously. I hate it. It is the only thing about you that I do not like. All the rest is terrible, is grand. In India you would be a god. Were you born with that frightful laugh on your face? No, no doubt it is a penal brand. I do hope you have committed some crime. Come to my arms. She sank on the couch and made him sit beside her. She sank on the couch and made him sit beside her. They found themselves close together unconsciously. What she said passed over Gwynplaine like a mighty storm. He hardly understood the meaning of her whirlwind of words. Her eyes were full of admiration. She spoke tumultuously, frantically, with a voice broken and tender. Her words were music, but their music was to Gwynplaine as a hurricane. Again she fixed her gaze upon him and continued. I feel degraded in your presence, and oh, what happiness that is! How insipid it is to be a grandee. I am noble. What can be more tiresome? Disgrace is a comfort. I am so satiated with respect that I long for contempt. We are all a little erratic, from Venus, Cleopatra, Mesdames de Chevreuse, and de Longueville, down to myself. I will make a display of you, I declare. Here's a love affair which will be a blow to my family, the Stuarts. Ah, I breathe again. I have discovered a secret. I am clear of royalty. To be free from its trammels is indeed deliverance. To break down, defy, make, and destroy at will, that is true enjoyment. Listen, I love you. She paused. Then, with a frightful smile, went on. I love you, not only because you are deformed, but because you are low. I love monsters, and I love mountebanks. A lover despised, mocked, grotesque, hideous, exposed to laughter on that pillory called a theatre, has for me an extraordinary attraction. It is tasting the fruit of hell. An infamous lover, how exquisite! To taste the apple not of paradise, but of hell. Such is my temptation. It is for that I hunger and thirst. I am that Eve, the Eve of the depths. Probably you are, unknown to yourself, a devil. I am in love with a nightmare. You are a moving puppet, of which the strings are pulled by a spectre. You are the incarnation of infernal mirth. You are the master I require. I wanted a lover such as those of Medea and Canidia. I felt sure that some night would bring me such a one. You are all that I want. I am talking of a heap of things of which you probably know nothing. Gwynplaine, hitherto I have remained untouched. I give myself to you, pure as a burning ember. You evidently do not believe me, but if you only knew how little I care." Her words flowed like a volcanic eruption. Pierce Mount Etna, and you may obtain some idea of that jet of fiery eloquence. Gwynplaine stammered. "Madam," she placed her hand on his mouth. "Silence," she said. "I am studying you. I am unbridled desire, immaculate. I am a Vestal Bacchante. No man has known me, and I might be the virgin Pythoness at Delphos, and have under my naked foot the bronze tripod, where the priests lean their elbows on the skin of the python, whispering questions to the invisible god. My heart is of stone, but it is like those mysterious pebbles which the sea washes to the foot of the rock called Huntley Nab, at the mouth of the Tees, and which, if broken, are found to contain a serpent. That serpent is my love, a love which is all-powerful, for it has brought you to me. An impossible distance between us. I was in Sirius, and you were in Alioth. You have crossed the immeasurable space, and here you are. 'Tis well. Be silent. Take me." She ceased. He trembled. Then she went on, smiling. "You see, Gwynplaine, to dream is to create, to desire is to summon, to build up the chimera is to provoke the reality. The all-powerful and terrible mystery will not be defied. It produces result. You are here. Do I dare to lose caste? Yes. Do I dare to be your mistress, your concubine, your slave, your chattel? Joyfully. Gwynplaine, I am woman. Woman is clay longing to become mire. I want to despise myself. That lends a zest to pride. The alloy of greatness is baseness. They combine in perfection. Despise me, you who are despised. Nothing can be better. Degradation on degradation. What joy! I pluck the double blossom of ignominy. Trample me under your foot. You will only love me the more, I am sure of it. Do you understand why I idolize you? Because I despise you. You are so immeasurably below me that I place you on an altar. Bring the highest and lowest depths together, and you have chaos, and I delight in chaos. Chaos, the beginning and end of everything. What is chaos? A huge blot. Out of that blot God made light, and out of that sink the world. You don't know how perverse I can be. Knead a star and mud, and you will have my likeness." She went on. "A wolf to all beside, a faithful dog to you. How astonished they will all be. The astonishment of fools is amusing. I understand myself. Am I a goddess? Aphrodite gave herself to the Cyclops. Am I a fairy? Urgele gave herself to Bogrix, a winged man with 8 webbed hands. Am I a princess? Marie Stuart had Rizzio. 3 beauties, 3 monsters. I am greater than they, for you are lower than they. Gwynplaine, we are made for one another. The monster that you are, outwardly, I am within. Thence my love for you. A caprice? Just so. Our stars have a certain affinity. Together we are things of night, you in your face, I in my mind. As your countenance is defaced, so is my mind. You in your turn create me. You come and your real soul shows itself. I did not know it. It is astonishing. Your coming has evoked the Hydra in me. Who am I, a goddess? You reveal my real nature. See how I resemble you. Look at me as if I were a mirror. Your face is my mind. I did not know I was so terrible. I am also, then, a monster. Oh, Gwynplaine, you do amuse me." She laughed, a strange and childlike laugh, and putting her mouth close to his ear, whispered, "Do you want to see a mad woman? Look at me." She poured her searching look into Gwynplaine. A look is a filter. Her loosened robe provoked 1,000 dangerous feelings. Blind, animal ecstasy was invading his mind, ecstasy combined with agony. Whilst she spoke, though he felt her words like burning coals, his blood froze within his veins. He had not strength to utter a word. She stopped and looked at him. "Oh, monster!" she cried. She grew wild. Suddenly she seized his hands. "Gwynplaine, I am the throne. You are the footstool. Let us join on the same level. Oh, how happy I am in my fall. I wish all the world could know how abject I am become. It would bow down all the lower. The more man abhors, the more does he cringe. It is human nature. Hostile, but reptile. Dragon, but worm. Oh, I am as depraved as are the gods. They can never say that I am not a king's bastard. I act like a queen. Who was Rhodope but a queen loving Thet? A man with a crocodile's head. She raised the third pyramid in his honor. Pentheus Penthesilea loved the centaur, who, being now a star, is named Sagittarius. And what do you say about Anne of Austria? Mazarin was ugly enough. Now you are not only ugly, you are deformed. Ugliness is the devil's grin behind beauty. Deformity is the reverse of sublimity. It is the back view. Olympus has two aspects. One by day shows Apollo, the other by night shows Polyphemus. You are a Titan. You would be Behemoth in the forests, Leviathan in the deep, and Typhon in the sewer. You surpass everything. There is the trace of lightning in your deformity. Your face has been battered by the thunderbolt. The jagged contortion of forked lightning has imprinted its mask on your face. It struck you and passed on. A mighty and mysterious wrath has, in a fit of passion, cemented your spirit in a terrible and superhuman form. Hell is a penal furnace, where the iron called fatality is raised to a white heat. You have been branded with it. To love you is to understand grandeur. I enjoy that triumph. To be in love with Apollo, a fine effort, forsooth. Glory is to be measured by the astonishment it creates. I love you. I have dreamt of you night after night. This is my palace. You shall see my gardens. There are fresh springs under the shrubs, arbors for lovers, and beautiful groups of marble statuary of Bernini. Flowers. There are too many. During the spring, the place is on fire with roses. Did I tell you that the queen is my sister? Do what you like with me. I am made for Jupiter to kiss my feet and for Satan to spit in my face. Are you of any religion? I am a papist. My father, James II, died in France, surrounded by Jesuits. I have never felt before as I feel now that I am near you. Oh, how I should like to pass the evening with you, in the midst of music, both reclining on the same cushion under a purple awning in a gilded gondola on the soft expanse of ocean. Insult me, beat me, kick me, cuff me, treat me like a brute. I adore you. Caresses can roar. If you doubt it, observe the lions. The woman was horrible and yet full of grace. The effect was tragic. First he felt the claw, then the velvet of the paw. A feline attack made up of advances and retreats. There was death as well as sport in this game of come and go. She idolized him, but arrogantly. The result was contagious frenzy. fatal language at once inexpressible, violent, and sweet. The insulter did not insult. The adorer outraged the object of adoration. She who buffeted deified him. Her tones imparted to her violent yet amorous words an indescribable Promethean grandeur. According to Aeschylus, in the orgies in honor of the great goddess, the women were smitten by this evil frenzy when they pursued the satyrs under the stars. Such paroxysms raged in the mysterious dances in the grove of Dodona. This woman was as if transfigured. If, indeed, we can term that transfiguration which is the antithesis of heaven. Her hair quavered like a mane, her robe opened and closed. The sunshine of the blue eye mingled with the fire of the black one. She was unearthly. Gwynplaine, giving way, felt himself vanquished by the deep subtlety of this attack. "I love you," she cried, and she bit him with a kiss. Homeric clouds were, perhaps, about to be required to encompass Gwynplaine and Hosiana as they did Jupiter and Juno. For Gwynplaine to be loved by a woman who could see and who saw him, to feel on his deformed mouth the pressure of divine lips, was exquisite and maddening. Before this woman, full of enigmas, all else faded away in his mind. The remembrance of Dea struggled in the shadows with weak cries. There is an antique bas-relief representing the Sphinx devouring a Cupid. The wings of the sweet celestial are bleeding between the fierce, grinning fangs. Did Gwynplaine love this woman? Has man, like the globe, two poles? Are we on this inflexible axis a moving sphere, a star when seen from far away, mud when seen closely, in which night alternates with day? Has the heart two aspects, one on which its love is poured forth in light, the other in darkness? Here a woman of light, there a woman of the sewer. Angels are necessary. Is it possible that demons are also essential? Has the soul the wings of the bat? Does twilight fall fatally for all? Is sin an integral and inevitable part of our destiny? Must we accept evil as part and portion of our whole? Do we inherit sin as a debt? What awful subjects for thought. Yet a voice tells us that weakness is a crime. Gwynplaine's feelings are not to be described. The flesh, life, terror, lust, and overwhelming intoxication of spirit, and all the shame possible to pride. Was he about to succumb? She repeated, "I love you," and flung her frenzied arms around him. Gwynplaine panted. Suddenly, close at hand, there rang, clear and distinct, a little bell. It was the little bell inside the wall. The Duchess, turning her head, said, "What does she want of me?" Quickly, with the noise of a spring door, the silver panel with the golden crown chased on it opened. A compartment of a shaft, lined with royal blue velvet, appeared, and on a golden salver a letter. The letter, broad and weighty, was placed so as to exhibit the seal, which was a large impression in red wax. The bell continued to tinkle. The open panel almost touched the couch where the Duchess and Gwynplaine were sitting. Leaning over, but still keeping her arm round his neck, she took the letter from the plate and touched the panel. The compartment closed in, and the bell ceased ringing. The Duchess broke the seal and, opening the envelope, drew out 2 documents contained therein, and flung it on the floor at Gwynplaine's feet. The impression of the broken seal was still decipherable, and Gwynplaine could distinguish a royal crown over the initial A. The torn envelope lay open before him so that he could read, "To Her Grace, the Duchess Hosiana." The envelope had contained both vellum and parchment. The former was a small, the latter a large document. On the parchment was a large chancery seal in green wax called Lord's sealing wax. The face of the Duchess, whose bosom was palpitating, and whose eyes were swimming with passion, became overspread with a slight expression of dissatisfaction. "Ah," she said, "what does she send me? A lot of papers. What a spoil sport that woman is." Pushing aside the parchment, she opened the vellum. "It is her handwriting. It is my sister's hand. It is quite provoking. Gwynplaine, I asked you if you could read. Can you?" Gwynplaine nodded assent. She stretched herself at full length on the couch, carefully drew her feet and arms under her robe, with a whimsical affectation of modesty, and, giving Gwynplaine the vellum, watched him with an impassioned look. "Well, you are mine. Begin your duties, my beloved. Read me what the Queen writes." Gwynplaine took the vellum, unfolded it, and, in a voice tremulous with many emotions, began to read. "Madam, we are graciously pleased to send to you herewith, sealed and signed by our trusty and well-beloved William Cowper, Lord High Chancellor of England, a copy of a report showing forth the very important fact that the legitimate son of Linnaeus Lord Clancharlie has just been discovered and recognized, bearing the name of Gwynplaine, in the lowest rank of a wandering and vagabond life, among strollers. His false position dates from his earliest days, in accordance with the laws of the country, and in virtue of his hereditary rights. Lord Fermain Clancharlie, son of Lord Linnaeus, will be this day admitted and installed in his position in the House of Lords. Therefore, having regard to your welfare, and wishing to preserve for your use the property and estates of Lord Clancharlie of Hunkerville, we substitute him in the place of Lord David Deary Moore, and recommend him to your good graces. We have caused Lord Fermain to be conducted to Corleone Lodge. We will and command, as sister and as queen, that the said Fermain Lord Clancharlie, hitherto called Gwynplaine, shall be your husband, and that you shall marry him. Such is our royal pleasure." While Gwynplaine, in tremulous tones which varied at almost every word, was reading the document, the Duchess, half risen from the couch, listened with fixed attention. When Gwynplaine finished, she snatched the letter from his hands. "Anne R.," she murmured in a tone of abstraction. Then, picking up from the floor the parchment she had thrown down, she ran her eye over it. It was the confession of the shipwrecked crew of the Matutina, embodied in a report signed by the Sheriff of Southwark and by the Lord Chancellor. Having perused the report, she read the Queen's letter over again. Then she said, "Be it so," and calmly pointing with her finger to the door of the gallery through which he had entered, she added, "Begone." Gwynplaine was petrified, and remained immovable. She repeated in icy tones, "Since you are my husband, begone." Gwynplaine, speechless, and with eyes downcast like a criminal, remained motionless. She added, "You have no right to be here. It is my lover's place." Gwynplaine was like a man transfixed. "Very well," said she, "I must go myself. So you are my husband. Nothing can be better. I hate you." She rose, and with an indescribably haughty gesture of adieu, left the room. The curtain in the doorway of the gallery fell behind her. End of chapter 4. Okay, so this chapter was wild, 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 wild. It starts off with Lady Hosiana just losing her mind over Gwynplaine, saying how disgusting, hideous, how lowborn and unimportant and downtrodden he is and how wonderful and highborn and like all of these things that she is, and she just loves him because of it. And he should never speak because his voice is too beautiful. She only wants to know disgusting things about him. And it's like really getting her going. And as they're like in an embrace, this goes on for like most of the chapter. And as they're like in this embrace, a little bell rings, and it's an envelope from the queen to Lady Hosiana. And Lady Hosiana's like, "Well, you can read, right? Read it to me." And it's a letter from the queen telling Lady Hosiana that they have found the heir of Lord Linnaeus Clancharlie, and that heir is Gwynplaine. And Gwynplaine is actually Fermain Clancharlie, and because of his station now, he's gonna marry you, not Lord David. And also in there is the confession by the people on the Matwatina ship of the terrible things that they've done. And at the end of that, she goes over, she rereads everything, and then she's like, "Leave. I hate you. This place is for place of my lover, not my husband." And he's just sort of shocked and doesn't leave, and she's like, "Fine, I'll leave." And that's the end of the chapter. And it's just like wild. Wild, wild, wild. I'm having a time. I'm having a time over here. Oh man, okay. All right. Chapter 5. They recognize but do not know each other. Ooh, interesting. Who who recognizes whom? Okay. Gwynplaine was alone. Alone and in the presence of the tepid bath and the deserted couch. The confusion in his mind had reached the culminating point. His thoughts no longer resembled thoughts. They overflowed and ran riot. It was the anguish of a creature wrestling with perplexity. He felt as if he were awakening from a horrid nightmare. The entrance into unknown spheres is no simple matter. From the time he had received the Duchess's letter brought by the page, a series of surprising adventures had befallen Gwynplaine, each one less intelligible than the other. Up to this time, though in a dream, he had seen things clearly. Now he could only grope his way. He no longer thought nor even dreamed. He collapsed. He sank down upon the couch which the Duchess had vacated. Suddenly he heard a sound of footsteps, and those of a man. The noise came from the opposite side of the gallery to that by which the Duchess had departed. The man approached, and his footsteps, though deadened by the carpet, were clear and distinct. Gwynplaine, in spite of his abstraction, listened. Suddenly, beyond the silver web of curtain which the Duchess had left partly open, a door, evidently concealed by the painted glass, opened wide, and there came floating into the room the refrain of an old French song, caroled at the top of a manly and joyous voice. Trois petits gorets sur le fermier. That's all I got. And a man entered. He wore a sword by his side, a magnificent naval uniform, covered with gold lace, and held in his hand a plumed hat with loops and cockade. Gwynplaine sprang up, as if moved by springs. He recognized the man, and was, in turn, recognized by him. From their astonished lips came, simultaneously, this double exclamation. "Gwynplaine? Tom Jim Jack!" The man with the plumed hat advanced towards Gwynplaine, who stood with folded arms. "What are you doing here, Gwynplaine?" And you, Tom Jim Jack, what are you doing here? Oh, I understand. Hosiana, a caprice, a mountebank, and a monster. The double attraction is too powerful to be resisted. You disguised yourself in order to get here, Gwynplaine? And you too, Tom Jim Jack? Gwynplaine, what does this gentleman's dress mean? Tom Jim Jack, what does that officer's uniform mean? Gwynplaine, I answer no questions. Neither do I, Tom Jim Jack. Gwynplaine, my name is not Tom Jim Jack. Tom Jim Jack is not Gwynplaine. Gwynplaine, I am here in my own house. And I am here in my own house, Tom Jim Jack. I will not have you echo my words. You are ironical, but I've got a cane, and an end to your jokes, you wretched fool. Gwynplaine became ashy pale. You are a fool yourself, and you shall give me satisfaction for this insult. In your booth as much as you like, with fisticuffs. Here, and with swords. My friend Gwynplaine, the sword is a weapon for gentlemen. With it I can only fight my equals. At fisticuffs we are equal, but not so with swords. At the Tadcaster Inn, Tom Jim Jack could box with Gwynplaine. At Windsor the case is altered. Understand this. I am a rear admiral. The man whom Gwynplaine recognized as Tom Jim Jack burst out laughing. What? Why not a king? Indeed, you are right. An actor plays every part. You'll tell me next that you are Theseus, Duke of Athens. I am a peer of England, and we are going to fight. Gwynplaine, this becomes tiresome. Don't play with one who can order you to be flogged. I am Lord David Dirry-Moir. And I am Lord Clancharlie. Again, Lord David burst out laughing. Well said. Gwynplaine is Lord Clancharlie. That is indeed the name of the man who must bear who is to win Hosiana. Listen, I forgive you. And do you know the reason? It's because we are both lovers of the same woman. The curtain in the door was lifted, and a voice exclaimed, You are the two husbands, my lord. They turned. Barkilphedro, cried Lord David. It was indeed he. He bowed low to the two lords, with a smile on his face. Some few paces behind him was a gentleman with a stern and dignified countenance, who carried in his hand a black wand. This gentleman advanced, and, bowing 3 times to Gwynplaine, said, I am the usher of the Black Rod. I come to fetch your lordships, in obedience to her majesty's commands. End of the chapter, and end of book the 7th. Okay. So this last chapter was Gwynplaine still sort of like in awe of like what happened with Lazy Hosiana, and he's like wandering around, and who should he see but Tom Jim Jack, who's not actually Tom Jim Jack, it's Lord David, which we sort of kind of thought that earlier. And they're just going back and forth, and it's almost like the two like or the 3 Spider-Men who are just like pointing at each other, because they're just saying the same thing, like, I live in this house. Well, I live in this house. Well, I'm a lord. Well, I'm a lord. Well, I'm of the peerage. Well, I'm of the peerage. And they're just going back and forth, and Tom Jim Jack is like, I will fight you. And Gwynplaine is like, dude, I am Fermain Clancharlie. And Gwynplaine, Lord David's like, that's hilarious, and I'm gonna forgive you because I know that we're both lovers of Lady Hosiana. And then out comes Barkilphedro with the Usher of the Black Rod, which I don't really know what that means, and addresses him as, you know, a lord, and just says, like, they're both the husbands. This is like, um, Maury level of entertainment. Jerry Springer level. Book the 8th, The Capital and the Things Around It. Chapter 1. Analysis of Majestic Matters. Irresistible fate ever carrying him forward, which had now for so many hours showered its surprises on Gwynplaine, and which had transported him to Windsor, transferred him again to London. Visionary realities succeeded each other without a moment's intermission. He could not escape from their influence. Freed from one, he met another. He had scarcely time to breathe. Anyone who has seen a juggler throwing and catching balls can judge the nature of fate. Those rising and falling projectiles are like men tossed in the hands of destiny, projectiles and playthings. On the evening of the same day, Gwynplaine was an actor in an extraordinary scene. He was seated on a bench covered with fleur-de-lis. Over his silken clothes he wore a robe of scarlet velvet, lined with white silk, with a cape of ermine, and on his shoulders 2 bands of ermine embroidered with gold. Around him were men of all ages, young and old, seated with him on benches covered with fleur-de-lis, and dressed like him in ermine and purple. In front of him other men were kneeling, clothed in black silk gowns. Some of them were writing. Opposite and a short distance from him he observed steps, a raised platform, a dais, a large escutcheon glittering between a lion and a unicorn, and at the top of the steps, on the platform under the dais, resting against the escutcheon, was a gilded chair with a crown over it. This was a throne, the throne of Great Britain. Gwynplaine, himself a peer of England, was in the House of Lords. How Gwynplaine's introduction to the House of Lords came about, we will now explain. Throughout the day, from morning to night, from Windsor to London, from Corleone Lodge to Westminster Hall, he had step by step mounted higher in the social grade. At each step he grew giddier. He had been conveyed from Windsor in a royal carriage with a peer's escort. There is not much difference between a guard of honor and a prisoner's. On that day, travelers on the London and Windsor road saw a galloping cavalcade of gentlemen pensioners of Her Majesty's household escorting 2 carriages drawn at a rapid pace. In the first carriage sat the Usher of the Black Rod, with his wand in his hand. In the second was to be seen a large hat with white plumes, throwing into shadow and hiding the face underneath it. Who was it who was thus being carried on? A prince? A prisoner? It was Gwynplaine. It looked as if they were conducting someone to the Tower, unless, indeed, they were escorting him to the House of Lords. The Queen had done things well. As it was for her future brother-in-law, she had provided an escort from her own household. The officer of the Usher of the Black Rod rode on horseback at the head of the cavalcade. The Usher of the Black Rod carried, on a cushion placed on a seat of the carriage, a black portfolio, stamped with the royal crown. At Brentford, the last relay before London, the carriages and escort halted. A 4-horse carriage of tortoise shell, and 2 postilions, a coachman in a wig, and 4 footmen, was in waiting. The wheels, steps, springs, pole, and all the fittings of this carriage were gilt. The horse's harness was of silver. This state coach was of an ancient and extraordinary shape, and would have been distinguished by its grandeur among the 51 celebrated carriages of which Robo has left us drawings. The Usher of the Black Rod and his officer alighted. The latter, having lifted the cushion on which rested the royal portfolio from the seat in the post-chaise, carried it on outstretched hands and stood behind the Usher. He first opened the door of the empty carriage, then the door of that occupied by Gwynplaine, and, with downcast eyes, respectfully invited him to descend. Gwynplaine left the chaise and took his seat in the carriage. The usher carrying the rod and the officer supporting the cushion followed, and took their places on the low front seats provided for pages in old state coaches. The inside of the carriage was lined with white satin trimmed with Binchi silk, with tufts and tassels of silver. The roof was painted with armorial bearings. The postilions of the chaises they were leaving were dressed in the royal livery. The attendants of the carriages they now entered wore a different but very magnificent livery. Gwynplaine, in spite of his bewildered state, in which he felt quite overcome, remarked the gorgeously attired footman and asked the usher of the black rod, "Whose livery is that?" He answered, "Yours, my lord." The House of Lords was to sit that evening. Courier erat serena, run the old records. In England, parliamentary work is by preference undertaken at night. It once happened that Sheridan began a speech at midnight and finished it at sunrise. The two post-chaises returned to Windsor. Gwynplaine's carriage set out for London. This ornamented four-horse carriage proceeded at a walk from Brentford to London, as befitted the dignity of the coachman. Gwynplaine's servitude to ceremony was beginning in the shape of this solemn-looking coachman. The delay was, moreover, apparently pre-arranged, and we shall see presently its probable motive. Night was falling, though it was not quite dark, when the carriage stopped at the King's Gate, a large sunken door between two turrets connecting Whitehall with Westminster. The escort of gentlemen pensioners formed a circle around the carriage. A footman jumped down from behind it and opened the door. The usher of the black rod, followed by the officer carrying the cushion, got out of the carriage and addressed Gwynplaine. "My lord, be pleased to alight. I beg your lordship to keep your hat on." Gwynplaine wore under his travelling cloak a suit of black silk, which he had not changed since the previous evening. He had no sword. He left his cloak in the carriage. Under the arched way of the King's Gate there was a small side door, raised some few steps above the road. In ceremonial processions the greatest personage never walks first. The usher of the black rod, followed by his officer, walked first. Gwynplaine followed. They ascended the steps and entered by the side door. Presently they were in a wide, circular room, with a pillar in the center, the lower part of a turret. The room, being on the ground floor, was lighted by narrow windows in the pointed arches, which served but to make darkness visible. Twilight often lends solemnity to a scene. Obscurity is in itself majestic. In this room 13 men, disposed in ranks, were standing, 3 in the front row, 6 in the second row, and 4 behind. In the front row one wore a crimson velvet gown, the other 2 gowns of the same color, but of satin. All 3 had the arms of England embroidered on their shoulders. The second rank wore tunics of white silk, each one having a different coat of arms emblazoned in front. The last row were clad in black silk, and were thus distinguished. The first wore a blue cape, the second had a scarlet St. George embroidered in front. The third, 2 embroidered crimson crosses in front and behind. The fourth had a collar of black sable fur. All were uncovered, wore wigs, and carried swords. Their faces were scarcely visible in the dim light, neither could they see Gwynplaine's face. The usher of the black rod, raising his wand, said, "My lord Fermain Clancharlie, Baron Clancharlie and Hungerville, I, the usher of the black rod, first officer of the presence chamber, hand your lordship over to Garter Kings at arms." The person clothed in velvet, quitting his place in the ranks, bowed to the ground before Gwynplaine and said, "My lord Fermain Clancharlie, I am Garter, principal King-at-Arms of England. I am the officer appointed and installed by his Grace the Duke of Norfolk, hereditary Earl Marshal. I have sworn obedience to the King, peers, and knights of the Garter. The day of my installation, when the Earl Marshal of England anointed me by pouring a goblet of wine on my head, I solemnly promised to be attentive to the nobility, to avoid bad company, to excuse rather than to accuse gentlefolks, and to assist widows and virgins. It is I who have the charge of arranging the funeral ceremonies of peers and the supervision of their armorial bearings. I place myself at the orders of your lordship." The first of those wearing satin tunics, having bowed deeply, said, "My lord, I am Clarenceux, second King-at-Arms of England. I am the officer who arranges the obsequies of nobles below the rank of peers. I am at your lordship's disposal." The other wearer of the satin tunic bowed and spoke thus: "My lord, I am Norre, third King-at-Arms of England. Command me." The second row, erect and without bowing, advanced a pace. The right-hand man said, "My lord, we are the 6 Dukes-at-Arms of England. I am York." Then each of the heralds or Dukes-at-Arms spoke in turn, proclaimed his title. "I am Lancaster." "I am Richmond." "I'm Chester." "I am Somerset." "I am Windsor." The coats of arms embroidered on their breasts were those of the counties and towns from which they took their names. The third rank, dressed in black, remained silent. Garter, King-at-Arms, pointing them out to Gwynplaine, said, "My lord, these are the 4 pursuivants at arms, Blue Mantle." The man with the blue cape bowed. "Rouge Dragon." He with the St. Charles inclined his head. "Rouge Croix." He with the scarlet crosses saluted. "Portcullis." He with the sable fur collar made his obeisance. On the sign of the King-at-Arms, the first of the pursuivants, Blue Mantle, stepped forward and received from the officer of the usher the cushion of silver cloth and crown emblazoned portfolio. And the King-at-Arms said to the usher of the black rod, "Proceed. I leave in your hands the introduction of his lordship." The observance of these customs, and also of others which will now be described, were the old ceremonies in use prior to the time of Henry VIII, and which Anne for some time attempted to revive. There is nothing like it in existence now. Nevertheless, the House of Lords thinks that it is unchangeable, and if conservatism exists anywhere, it is there. It changes, nevertheless, et pur si move. For instance, what has become of the Maypole, which the citizens of London erected on the 1st of May, when the peers were down to the House? The last one was erected in 1713. Since then, the Maypole has disappeared. Disuse. Outwardly unchangeable, inwardly mutable. Take, for example, the title of Albemarle. It sounds eternal, yet it has been through 6 different families: Odo, Mandeville, Bethune, Plantagenet, Beauchamp, Monk. Under the title of Leicester, 5 different names have been merged: Beaumont, Breose, Dudley, Sidney, Coke. Under Lincoln, 6. Under Pembroke, 7. The families change under unchanging titles. A superficial historian believes in immutability. In reality, it does not exist. Man can never be more than a wave. Humanity is the ocean. Aristocracy is proud of what women consider a reproach: age. Yet both cherish the same illusion that they do not change. It is probable the House of Lords will not recognize itself in the foregoing description, nor yet in that which follows, thus resembling the once pretty woman who objects to having any wrinkles. The mirror is ever a scapegoat, yet its truths cannot be contested. To portray exactly constitutes the duty of a historian. The king at arms, turning to Gwynplaine, said, "Be pleased to follow me, my lord," and added, "You will be saluted. Your lordship, in returning the salute, will be pleased merely to raise the brim of your hat." They moved off, in procession, towards a door at the far side of the room. The usher of the black rod walked in front, then Blue Mantle, carrying the cushion, then the king at arms, and after him came Gwynplaine, wearing his hat. The rest, kings at arms, heralds, and pursuivants, remained in the circular room. Gwynplaine, preceded by the usher of the black rod and escorted by the king at arms, passed from room to room in a direction which it would now be impossible to trace. The old Houses of Parliament have been pulled down. Amongst others, he crossed that Gothic state chamber in which took place the last meeting of James II. And Monmouth, and whose walls witnessed the useless debasement of the cowardly nephew at the feet of his vindictive uncle. On the walls of this chamber hung, in chronological order, 9 fell-length portraits of former peers, with their dates: Lord Nansladren, 1305. Lord Balliol, 1306, Lord Benesteed, 1314, Lord Cantilupe, 1356, Lord Montbigon, 1357, Lord Tabottet, 1373, Lord Zoch of Codner, 1615, Lord Bellaaqua, with no date, Lord Heron and Surrey, Count of Blois, also without date. It being now dark, lamps were burning at intervals in the galleries. Brass chandeliers with wax candles illuminated the rooms, lighting them like the side aisles of a church. None but officials were present. In one room, which the procession crossed, stood, with heads respectfully lowered, the 4 clerks of the signet and the clerk of the council. In another room stood the distinguished knight banneret, Philip Sydenham of Brimpton, in Somersetshire. The knight banneret is a title conferred in time of war under the unfurled royal standard. In another room was the senior baronet of England, Sir Edmund Bacon of Suffolk, heir of Sir Nicholas Bacon, styled Primus Baronetorum Angelicae. Behind Sir Edmund was an armor-bearer with an arquebus, and an esquire carrying the arms of Ulster, the baronets being the hereditary defenders of the province of Ulster in Ireland. In another room was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, with his 4 accountants and the 2 deputies of the Lord Chamberlain, appointed to cleave the tallies. And there is a footnote right there, and it says, the author is apparently mistaken. The chamberlains of the Exchequer divided the wooden laths into tallies, which were given out when dispersing coin, and checked or tallied when accounting for it. It was in burning the old tallies in an oven that the Houses of Parliament were destroyed by fire. And that's a note written by the translator. At the entrance of a corridor covered with matting, which was the communication between the lower and the upper house, Gwynplaine was saluted by Sir Thomas Mansell of Margam, comptroller of the Queen's household and member for Glamorgan, and at the exit of the corridor by a deputation of 1 for every 2 of the barons in the Cinque Ports, 4 on the right and 4 on the left, the Cinque Ports being 8 in number. William Hastings did obeisance for Hastings, Matthew Ailemore for Dover, Josias Burchetts for sandwich, Sir Philip Boteler for Hythe, John Brewer for new rummy, Edward Southwell for Winchelsea, George Naylor for Seaford. As Gwynplaine was about to return the salute, the king-at-arms reminded him in a low voice of the etiquette. "Only the brim of your hat, my lord." Gwynplaine did as directed. He now entered the so-called painted chamber, in which there was no painting, except a few of saints, and amongst them Saint Edward, and the high arches of the long and deep-pointed windows, which were divided by what formed the ceiling of Westminster Hall and the floor of the painted chamber. On the far side of the wooden barrier, which divided the room from end to end, stood the 3 secretaries of state, men of mark. The functions of the first of these officials comprised the supervision of all affairs relating to the south of England, Ireland, the colonies, France, Switzerland, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and Turkey. The second had charge of the north of England and watched affairs in the Low Countries, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Poland, and Russia. The third, a Scot, had charge of Scotland. The 2 first mentioned were English, one of them being the Honourable Robert Marley, member for the borough of New Radnor. A Scotch member, Mungo Graham, Esquire, a relation of the Duke of Montrose, was present. All bowed, without speaking, to Gwynplaine, who returned the salute by touching his hat. The barrier-keeper lifted the wooden arm which, pivoting on a hinge, formed the entrance to the far side of the painted chamber, where stood the long table, covered with green cloth, reserved for peers. A branch of lighted candles stood on the table. Gwynplaine, preceded by the usher of the Black Rod, Garter King-at-Arms, and Blue Mantle, penetrated into this privileged compartment. The barrier-keeper closed the opening immediately. Gwynplaine had passed. The King-at-Arms, having entered the precincts of the privileged compartment, halted. The painted chamber was a spacious apartment. At the farther end, upright, beneath the royal escutcheon, which was placed between the 2 windows, stood 2 old men in red velvet robes, with 2 rows of ermine trimmed with gold lace on their shoulders, and wearing wigs and hats with white plumes. Through the openings of their robes might be detected silk garments and sword hilts. Motionless behind them stood a man dressed in black silk, holding on high a great mace of gold surmounted by a crowned lion. It was the mace-bearer of the peers of England. The lion is their crest. The King-at-Arms pointed out the 2 persons in velvet and whispered to Gwynplaine. "My lord, these are your equals. Be pleased to return their salute exactly as they make it. These 2 peers are barons and have been named by the Lord Chancellor as your sponsors. They are very old and almost blind. They will themselves introduce you to the House of Lords. The first is Charles Mildmay, Lord Fitzwalter, 6th on the roll of barons. The second is Augustus Arundel, Lord Arundel of Trerice, 38th on the roll of barons." The King-at-Arms, having advanced a step towards the 2 old men, proclaimed, "Fermain Clancharlie, Baron Clancharlie, Baron Hunkerville, Marquis of Corleone in Sicily, greets your lordship." The 2 peers raised their hats to the full extent of the arms, and then replaced them. Gwynplaine did the same. The usher of the Black Rod stepped forward, followed by Blue Mantle and Garter King-at-Arms. The mace-bearer took up his post in front of Gwynplaine, the 2 peers at his side, Lord Fitzwalter on the right, and Lord Arundel of Trerice on the left. Lord Arundel, the elder of the 2, was very feeble. He died the following year, bequeathing to his grandson John, a minor, the title which became extinct in 1768. The procession, leaving the painted chamber, entered a gallery in which were rows of pilasters, and between the spaces were sentinels, alternately pikemen of England and halberdiers of Scotland. The Scotch halberdiers were magnificent kilted soldiers, worthy to encounter later on at Fontenoy the French cavalry, and the royal cuirassiers, whom their colonel thus addressed: Monsieur le Maître, assurez vos chapeaux. Nous allons avoir l'honneur de charger. The captain of these soldiers saluted Gwynplaine and the peers, his sponsors, with their swords. The men saluted with their pikes and halberds. At the end of the gallery shone a large door, so magnificent that its two folds seemed to be masses of gold. On each side of the door there stood, upright and motionless, men who were called doorkeepers. Just before you came to this door, the gallery widened out into a circular space. In this space was an armchair with an immense back, and on it, judging by its wig and from the amplitude of his robes, was a distinguished person. It was William Cowper, Lord Chancellor of England. To be able to cap a royal infirmity with a similar one has its advantages. William Cowper was short-sighted. Anne had also defective sight, but in a lesser degree. The nearsightedness of William Cowper found favor in the eyes of the short-sighted queen, and induced her to appoint him Lord Chancellor and Keeper of the Royal Conscience. William Cowper's upper lip was thin, and his lower one thick, a sign of semi-good nature. This circular space was lighted by a lamp hung on the ceiling. The Lord Chancellor was sitting gravely in his large armchair. At his right was the Clerk of the Crown, and at his left the Clerk of the Parliaments. Each of the clerks had before him an open register and an inkhorn. Behind the Lord Chancellor was his mace-bearer, holding the mace with the crown on the top, besides the train-bearer and purse-bearer in large wigs. All these officers are still in existence. On a little stand near the woolsack was a sword, with a gold hilt and sheath, and belt of crimson velvet. Behind the Clerk of the Crown was an officer holding in his hands the coronation robe. Behind the Clerk of the Parliaments another officer held a second robe, which was that of a peer. The robes, both of scarlet velvet, lined with white silk, and having bands of ermine trimmed with gold lace over the shoulders, were similar, except that the ermine band was wider on the coronation robe. The third officer, who was the librarian, carried on a square of Flanders leather the Red Book, a little volume bound in red morocco, containing a list of the peers and commons, beside a few blank leaves and a pencil, which it was the custom to present to each new member on his entering the house. Gwynplaine, between the two peers, his sponsors, brought up the procession, which stopped before the woolsack. The two peers who introduced him uncovered their heads, and Gwynplaine did likewise. The king-at-arms received from the hands of Blue Mantle the cushion of silver cloth, knelt down, and presented the black portfolio on the cushion to the Lord Chancellor. The Lord Chancellor took the black portfolio and handed it to the Clerk of the Parliament. The clerk received it ceremoniously and then sat down. The Clerk of the Parliament opened the portfolio and arose. The portfolio contained the two usual messages, the royal patent addressed to the House of Lords, and the writ of summons. The clerk read aloud these two messages with respectful deliberation, standing. The writ of summons, addressed to Fermain Lord Clancharlie, concluded with the accustomed formalities. We strictly enjoin you, on the faith and allegiance that you owe, to come and take your place in person among the prelates and peers sitting in our Parliament at Westminster, for the purpose of giving your advice, in all honor and conscience, on the business of the kingdom and of the Church. The reading of the messages being concluded, the Lord Chancellor raised his voice. The message of the Crown has been read. Lord Clancharlie, does your lordship renounce substantiation, adoration of saints, and the Mass. Gwynplaine bowed. The test has been administered, said the Lord Chancellor, and the Clerk of the Parliament resumed. The Lord has taken the test, the Lord Chancellor added. My Lord Clancharlie, you can take your seat. So be it, said the two sponsors. The king-at-arms rose, took the sword from the stand, and buckled it round Gwynplaine's waist. Suffect, says the old Norman charter. Le père prend son épée et monte au hors sièges et assiste à l'audience. Gwynplaine heard a voice behind him which said, I array your lordship in a peer's robe. At the same time, the officer who spoke to him, who was holding the robe, placed it on him, and tied the black strings of the ermine cape round his neck. Gwynplaine, the scarlet robe on his shoulders, and the golden sword by his side, was attired like the peers on his right and left. The librarian presented to him the red book, and put it in the pocket of his waistcoat. The king-at-arms murmured in his ear, My lord, on entering, will bow at the royal chair. The royal chair is the throne. Meanwhile, the two clerks were writing, each at his table, one on the register of the crown, the other on the register of the house. Then both, the clerk of the crown preceding the other, brought their books to the Lord Chancellor, who signed them. Having signed the two registers, the Lord Chancellor rose. Fermain Lord Clancharlie, Baron Clancharlie, Baron Hunkerville, Marquis of Corleone in Sicily, be your welcome among your peers, the lords spiritual and temporal of Great Britain. Gwynplaine's sponsors touched his shoulder. He turned round. The folds of the great gilded door at the end of the gallery opened. It was the door of the House of Lords. 36 hours only had elapsed since Gwynplaine, surrounded by a different procession, had entered the iron door of Southwark Jail. What shadowy chimeras had passed with terrible rapidity through his brain, chimeras which were hard facts, rapidity which was a capture by assault. End of chapter 1. Okay, so this chapter, before we get into that, I love that at the end of the chapter, because I was thinking as we were reading this, like, okay, how long has it been since Gwynplaine has found out that he is royal? And we get that answered. It's been 36 hours, which is insane. So 36 hours after he thought that he was going to prison, he is now this royal and being sworn in as a member of the peerage, which is wild. He's wearing these very elegant clothes. He's walking through. He has sort of like an advisor that's beside him that's like telling him who people are and how to like salute different people, how to address them, all of those things, like where he stands in the hierarchy of all of this business. And so they're going through, and then he's now part of it. He is now a member. It has been signed by both the House and by the Crown, and it's official. It is official. I think that's where we're gonna end tonight. The next chapter is a bit longer, so let's do a close. So yeah, I think I'm liking it so far. I don't know how this book is gonna end. I'm not really sure. I am almost wondering if Gwynplaine is going to end up. So I don't think it's gonna be happy. I'm wondering if he's going to turn into a terrible member of the aristocracy to show just how much like power and influence can change people, and just like if you're already in like a really nice situation and you're so far removed from the rest of humanity, maybe your priorities change. So I'm wondering if that is going to happen. I'm wondering if somehow the king is going to be mad again now that he's back and he didn't die and people have found him. I'm wondering if like something else is going to happen that is going to either end with the end of his life or be thrown back to being impoverished. I don't quite know how, because like he is part of the lineage. I'm not quite sure. But I guess we'll have to find out. So yeah, that's going to be where we end today. We're about to start chapter 2 of the 8th book. We're trucking right along. So we'll pick up right where we left off. As always, whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate you, and I 1000% appreciate your support. If I do not see you next time, I hope to see you very soon. Bye.